Hi folks, thanks for tuning in to learn about the invasive species threats of the Lake George and Greater Lake Champlain Watershed. This program is a partnership between Warren County Soil and Water Conservation District and Lake George Land Conservancy, and it is all thanks to a grant from the Lake Champlain Basin Program and NUEPIC. My name is Monica Dorr. I'm the Conservation Project Manager for the Lake George Land Conservancy, which protects land in the Lake George watershed. We conserve land and then we steward it, and a lot of that stewardship involves the management of invasive species. Because we recognize, and so does Warren County Soil and Water, that invasive species have an impact on land and habitat and definitely on water quality. Marin and Bob are both from Warren County Soil and Water, and they'll be speaking about riparian invasives and then aquatic invasives. And our contact information is shared on this slide in case you have any questions after this presentation and need to reach out to us. The one thing I'll note is that for my email, it should be mdor@lglc.org. But I think you all will figure it out from the logo to the left. So please, with any questions, feel free to reach out to us. So I'm going to talk briefly about what invasive species are, and then about their impact, the impact that they have on our lives, on native ecosystems, on the economy, and then Marin will take it away with riparian invasives, and Bob will talk about aquatic invasives. So invasive species are non-native species that are brought to an area, usually by humans. So people will find a plant that they think is really pretty, and they'll bring it from one place to another, not realizing that the plant or insect or whatever it might be can spread really easily. And that's because invasive species, non-native species, don't have a native predator to keep them in check. So they really can grow and reproduce and be unchecked in an ecosystem, and then they can outcompete native species. So not every non-native species becomes invasive, but we do like to put an emphasis on native species, and definitely before you do any landscaping, check the prohibited species of your area, again, just to try and save us from trouble down the line. So the ecological impacts of invasive species. Invasive species are responsible for some of the extinction and definitely a decline in native plants and animals. And again, as I said, that's because they can outcompete native plants and animals. They don't have any sort of predator, and they can grow. For example, plants can grow really quickly into a monoculture if they don't have an insect that eats them. And so then you can have an invasive plant that has just completely dominated a wetland, and really important, really cool native plants are removed from the system, and then that's the loss of habitat for animals. So it's a domino effect. It's always one thing impacts another. The Lake George watershed does have federally threatened plants and animals, and so we like to keep an eye out for invasives, again, just to protect sometimes the species we don't even think about, but we want to defend them from invasives. Economically, invasives are expensive. The US reports spending more than $120 billion every year. And that's pretty much on the management of invasive species. And then there are unseen costs too sometimes, or unseen losses. And one of the main ones, especially in the Lake George watershed, would be an impact on tourism. So things we might not even think about, but if suddenly the Lake George watershed had so much Eurasian milfoil that you couldn't speed your boat through the lake, it would be a much less attractive destination, and folks might stop coming here. It also, something like purple loosestrife or Phragmites could impact your dock and make the water less accessible. an impact on the water quality, might not be the best drinking water in the world. And then some invasives have a public health concern. The one that always comes to my mind is poison parsnip, because I have such a reaction to it. That can be costly and concerning as well. Maren will go on and talk later about knotweed. But one thing worth noting, because knotweed is a hot invasive, is that not here in the US, but in the UK, some banks deny mortgages for people's homes if they have knotweed on the property. So it's not even so much something that the government has to worry about, but some invasives do come into play in your day-to-day life and have an impact on you and your finances. Another impact, so if we're thinking about forestry, invasives reproduce the productivity of forests and also of grasslands. We don't really think about the grasslands too much, especially for farming. But some invasives suck up water really, really, really quickly, like invasive honeysuckle will, and that decreases groundwater levels. And it also degrades the soils and makes it so that the timber that we want to harvest, or private landowners want to harvest, would be less desirable, and you have less return on it. And other invasives like hemlock woolly adelgid are considered to be a risk of forest fires because they might kill off a bunch of trees, and then dead standing wood is a threat to catch on fire. And an estimated 50% of drinking water originates in forests. In the Lake George watershed, the land is really one of our greatest resources in protecting water quality. It saves us a boatload of money. That land naturally filters our drinking water for us. We don't have to worry so much about expensive plants and treating with chemicals before we drink water. And that's one of the reasons why managing invasives is so important, because we're protecting that land resource that does the water filtration for us, and that saves money down the line. So mostly today we're talking about invasive plants, and how they impact the water that we all love to recreate on and drink from. But I want to talk really quickly about an invasive insect because it is something that will have an impact on water quality if left unchecked. So hemlock woolly adelgid is a very, very tiny insect that originated from Japan and has been working its way up from the Appalachians. I think it was first spotted in the US in North Carolina, I believe. And it's worked its way north since the 50s, and it is here now in the Adirondack Park. The first spotting, confirmed sighting of HWA was in 2017 at Prospect Mountain. But in early August of this year, of 2020, of course, because it's 2020, why wouldn't it happen? HWA was found again in the blue line on the eastern side, on the eastern shore of Lake George at Glen Island Campground. So it's a new invasive, and that's one of the reasons it's so important to keep an eye out for it, is because early detection is key in slowing this invasive down and keeping it from just overtaking our forests. So HWA is a really small insect. The insect itself, when it's visible, looks like a little sesame seed, but the key clue that you're going to get that a hemlock is infested with HWA is that the underside of a hemlock twig will have these white, woolly, waxy masses along the woody tissue, not along the needles, but along the woody tissue of a hemlock twig. And that'll be visible from late fall into early spring, so maybe November-ish into March. But that woolly mass can be visible even later on in the year. It can be seen in the summertime, and it has helped identify recent confirmed infestations. The way that HWA works is that it just puts itself along the woody tissue, and then it feeds out of the tree, and over time it kills the tree. HWA is concerning because it has 2 life cycles per year, so there's a lot of reproduction there, a lot of offspring that can damage a tree, and it reproduces asexually. So one little insect that comes here on the wings of a bird from downstate New York or from Pennsylvania can result in an entire infestation. And an infestation can kill an eastern hemlock within 5 to 20 years. Global warming will not really help us in this way because these insects get acclimated to the colder climate as time goes on. So again, the early detection is key to spotting this. There's a lot of really helpful handouts on the New York State Hemlock Initiative website, and please email me if you have any interest in volunteering and looking for these and you're looking for some help. I'm trying to keep this somewhat brief, but we have resources on what to look for. So the management of HWA, again, the first thing is this top left-hand picture is somebody monitoring. In the wintertime, it's when there's nothing else to do in the winter, get out and snowshoe and look for HWA. It's an excuse to get into the hidden reaches of the forest. Looking for it, if you think you find it, take a picture and report it to IMAP Invasives, to DEC, or again, you can email me, because finding it early on will just help keep the problem as controlled as possible. When an infestation is found, a professional certified pesticide applicator will come in and treat the tree using one of 2 chemicals, dimetaphyrin or imidacloprid. These are both heavily researched treatment options that have been found to have pretty close to no impact on non-target organisms. And actually, some bodies of research have supported that areas that have been treated with these 2 treatments actually have higher biodiversity and stronger ecosystems than areas where the trees were not treated, where the trees were just left to die. Because hemlocks play such an important role in the ecosystem, having them treated and kept alive is the best option. Nobody wants to use chemicals, but these have been very closely researched and are our best option for saving our hemlock forests as we wait on a biocontrol. So several labs, including the New York State Hemlock Initiative lab out at Cornell, are researching biocontrols, which are native predators of hemlock bulliadelgid that are brought in from that are brought in from HWA's homeland, I guess I would say, and they're brought here to control HWA populations and to keep them from going unchecked. This might still be a little bit, I know that they break ground, but it might be a little ways off for our region. But there are biocontrol options that are being researched now. We have longer presentations on HWA. Again, I'm trying to share the screen today. But there is one on our YouTube channel, which is LGLC, or LG Land Conservancy. And if you think you have seen HWA, please take a picture, please make a detailed note of the tree, and then email the pictures to DEC or call DEC, email me, and report to IMAP Invasives.
All right, hi everyone. I'm Maren Alexander. I'm with Warren County Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm a district technician there. So I'm here to talk to you guys about riparian invasive plants. I think it's important to talk about them because riparian areas, they're very critical for wildlife habitat, and they also are the areas that buffer our water bodies. And Warren County has quite a few lakes, including Lake George, which is a part of the Lake Champlain Basin. So I'm first just going to talk about kind of what is a riparian area. So basically in this photo you can see that they're identifying it as the area between land and water, which is probably the most easiest way to know what a riparian area is. So these areas, they're floodplains, they're wetlands, They're the bank of a river. They're the shoreline area. So basically, they undergo quite a bit of disturbance. They're naturally disturbed because of ice scouring in the wintertime, water runoff happening. So it's really important that we keep, having woody material there and perennial native plants because they work as a buffer to help filter water. Runoff, we also, they're stabilizing that bank and just reducing erosion and sediment in a water body, as well as providing habitat for animals. So now that you kind of have an understanding of what those areas are, I'm just going to cover 3 species today, which is Japanese knotweed, Phragmites, and purple loosestrife, which are very common in Warren County and just in the Lake Champlain watershed as well. So common reedgrass, I always call it Phragmites because that's just, I think, what's common for Warren County, but you'll hear it as common reedgrass as well. So what our concerns are with this species is that, and Monica had touched on it, but basically it tends to form a dense monoculture, which crowds out native vegetation, and it just doesn't have very much value for wildlife. Not only that, this plant is just so well at taking over areas that it just slowly, it'll release a toxin that'll kill just the surrounding vegetation in these, I would almost call it a stand of Phragmites because it's so tall. In addition to that, because it just builds up so much biomass when it forms a thicket, it can be a fire hazard. It can also lower water levels, which are frustrating for people who like to recreate on lakes or other water bodies, and it can just essentially just fill in a wetland.
Okay, so we're here at Echo Lake in Warrensburg, so we're outside of the Lake Champlain watershed. But we wanted to bring you here because we thought this was a really good site to show the impacts that Phragmites can have. This is a very small lake, so there's not a lot of water movement. And you can see just by this patch of Phragmites, or called common reedgrass, that it's really easily establishing itself. There's many sites all around this lake, and it's just kind of slowly filling in. It's something that we would probably call a monoculture, meaning that other vegetation isn't growing with it. It forms a dense weed mat, and just basically, you can see that it's blocking your view, not providing a ton of wildlife habitat, because birds don't really like to nest in it or anything, and can just be very troublesome for our lake communities and wetland areas. So just a few things about the characteristics of this plant. You can see just by this video that its height is pretty significant, growing to about 15 feet. Here I have an old seed head from last year. You can see how dense this is, and also just the fact that how green and smooth the sheath is of this plant. So very easy to identify, kind of a thing that once you see it, and kind of that blue-green color it has, you'll know it. There is a native lookalike out there, which is got some pretty, little differences between the two. One of them being that it'll have more of a red sheath versus a green sheath like this. And it also just has a smaller seed head than this common reedgrass. And in addition to that, it grows to a much shorter height where it might be about 6 to 8 feet. Whereas this, you can see very tall, well above my head. And I'm about 6 feet tall.
All right, so yeah, again, just to touch on a few of the characteristics. You know, there is a native version of Phragmites that can be found in this area, but there's also this non-native, which is probably what you're seeing. That really tall height of 3 to 13 feet here, I think it can grow, honestly, 15 feet. And then you'll have these large seed heads developing in July and just remaining and spreading seed throughout fall. And then the other aspect is, you know, when you're looking at these stands of Phragmites, it'll, you know, you're likely looking at only a few plants because it reproduces by setting out rhizomes, so it's usually just one single plant in these areas. So again, just to talk about kind of the differences between if you found native Phragmites versus the non-native. You'll see that reddish-brown stalk on your native version, which is Phragmites americana, and then you'll have you'll have a greenish stalk that is the non-native version. And then in this picture on the right, you can see that the seed head is significantly smaller and less dense for the native version versus your invasive. Here, I just wanted to show you guys kind of how, just a change from June of 2019 to June of 2020. This is a property in Warren County that was used for tennis tournaments and just, you know, for recreation. And basically, you know, the town is, you know, faces a huge challenge here with trying to revitalize this property that's surrounded by a wetland that's just slowly getting overtaken by Phragmites patches. And you can just see, you know, the differences between the photos, how much of a change that was for just a year's time. Like in 2019, the photo on the top left, we can see that I mean, you can't really see it, but you might be able to a little bit. You know, you can actually see the runners of this plant where it's going to set out new shoots. And then in 2020, you know, looking at that same tennis court, you really aren't seeing that. So you can see how it's a big issue for recreation and management, and the town will have to deal with this for many, many years to come. So, you know, what are you going to do for management for a species? This photo is showing another patch of Phragmites that's on Echo Lake, where we were visiting before taking the video. And, you know, these are just all over. So, you know, off the bat for this species, since it's so aggressive, it's really common in the Great Lakes region where there's a lot of research being done about it. You know, just you want to probably reach out to a professional, especially a licensed applicator. Herbicide treatment is really effective because these plants are spread by rhizomes, so it's really, you know, singly one plant. So when you do use an herbicide, it'll reach the root of that plant and kill a significant portion of your patch. But you need to work with someone licensed, and you need to get the proper permits. What's challenging about these riparian invasive species is the fact that, you know, they're in wet areas. So if you're looking at doing types of herbicide treatments, you're going to have to get special herbicides that you as a landowner will not be able to probably use on that plant because you're working near a water body or a sensitive area for plants and animals. But, you know, this is a very effective treatment, but there's also other options. Prescribed burning, you can do that. You know, it can be really effective because of the amount of biomass it builds up, but these sites are challenging because they're on usually, you know, in standing water. Also, do you have the capability to control that area? You know, we can find Phragmites in sites that are very, you know, wet, mucky soils. So to be able to control a fire area would be difficult for walking and just, you know, maintaining that area. You can do mechanical removal, which I often try to recommend to people just right off the bat. If you can mow it, or if you can try to hand pull it, it doesn't hurt to just try to break up, that plant being able to produce a seed head for the following year. There's also water level management, which is very effective. So what you would do in this situation, you can see that this, these plants are standing out in the water. You would cut them down, and you basically, if you could, make a deeper pool or raise the water level, that it would just flood over the stalks. That can slowly kill the plant. But many years of management ahead of you for this. And you can also try to take, 2 different approaches to trying to eradicate this species for effective control when it's trying to be resilient. Disposal, if you do decide to cut it back, you are going to have to rake up any biomass, bag it, and then you're going to have to set it out in the sun or send it to an appropriate location to prevent the seed spread. Sometimes those are burn plants for species, but basically just to make it so that it's non-viable. And then, for Phragmites, you're going to have to continuously monitor this species. Any of these invasive plants, it's just continuous management and being very diligent. I mentioned multiple control methods for the best results. It does spread by rhizome or by pieces, or fragments of the plant. So you could, if something floats down the river or floats to somebody else's dock, be wary of that. Notify your neighbors what sorts of management you're doing, get the proper permissions. And then just knowing that you're not just looking at the patch size itself, you probably need to put a buffer of areas you need to check around that site to make sure that you're minimizing the movement and the travel of this plant. Once you do get it eradicated, however, basically, it can reestablish itself within, 3 years after management, but truthfully, there hopefully is a native seed bank underneath of that thick monoculture, and basically it'll just reestablish on its own. Just doing your own planting isn't necessarily recommended. Okay, so the next species we're going to talk about is purple loosestrife. You've probably seen this if you've ever driven along an interstate, looking out into a wetland area. Just a very showy flower that'll bloom sometime in July. This species, we're concerned about it because it reduces biodiversity. Riparian areas, it's critical that we maintain diverse plants because they are a food source for wildlife. And it's also acting as a stormwater management area, filtering out those sediments and just reducing erosion and sedimentation into water bodies. And so, loosestrife, the issue with this is, you can see in this bottom photo, it's kind of taken over a wetland area, but it's really, basically it's not providing a source for wildlife. This species, just to note, it's originally from Eurasia, and it was introduced to our area for the fact that it's really good for beekeeping out in Europe and stuff, and so they thought that would be really good here. So a few ways we identify this species is, it forms a dense spike-like flower, and it's a really showy purple color. I think that is probably the easiest way to kind of narrow down what you're looking at. It also, the stems are unique because they're square, and the leaves are simple, entire, and opposite, and sometimes I've even seen them whorled on those stems. It's just, if you go up to this plant and you kind of move your hands around the stem, you'll really feel that ridge, you know, where it is a square, and just makes it very easy to identify. So this plant, you know, it spreads so well because one of these single seed heads can actually produce 2.5 million seeds, and in just a single growing season. And basically, it just has a huge seed bank, so it just becomes very prolific, growing to about 3 feet high. And you know, you can see this plant bloom as early as June, even through September. Okay, so for management of this species, what you can do is you can do some pulling and digging yourself. But I usually don't like to recommend digging or pulling it because you can see in the bottom right-hand corner that it has that very deep taproot, which is really easy to just break those off. And so the next year, you know, it just might not be effective if you can get that entire plant up, because it'll just have a plant there the following year if there's any root fragment left. You can also mow it when it is you know, when it is dry, but that's pretty unlikely since we're looking at wetland areas and we're looking at riparian areas, which are just notorious for having feet wet species like purple loosestrife. There's also burning, which people have tried, but again, ineffective due to the deep taproot. Flooding, the same thing. This plant just thrives being in these wetland areas. There's herbicide treatment, but pretty costly and might not be your best solution. And then, you know, there's grazing. So when the site is dry and it's maybe not an actual wetland, you can try to have, like in your, you know, you can keep animals out of the water body. You can try to have them come in and graze on it, which people have tried and has proven to be effective because it's just, you know, if they're mowing down the plant, it's not able to produce a seed head, and it's also just not photosynthesizing. And then the last method we're going to talk about is a biological control method, which I will play a short video that Monica made.
So we are out today at the Charles R. Wood Park, the Westbrook Conservation Initiative wetland portion of it. For a couple years, Warren County Soil and Water has released Garicella biocontrol beetles. We'll zoom in a minute to show you that those little guys really pick away at the loosestrife. So over the years, the Garicella beetles have established here, and they've been able to pretty successfully every year reproduce, and they do a good job of keeping the amount of loosestrife down, so that there doesn't have to be so much mechanical control. The biological control really just takes care of the loosestrife and prevents it from spreading so much. We're using this little handy tool, which we use to kind of siphon in the beetles. We find them on a leaf and then just suck them in. I would say it's probably almost a full day's worth of work to get the amount of beetles that you need. You need pretty much 200 adult beetles from one site, and then you can take them and put them on a group of plants, cover them up with some netting. We do this at the Lake George Land Conservancy office. We have like a kiddie pool that we have purple loosestrife growing in, and then we cover it with this kind of netting and release about 200 adults into. They eat away at the loosestrife, and in the meantime they also reproduce and establish a really good population. And then we can take those numbers and release them into the wild at a medium to large, or small to medium, I guess, actually, stand of purple loosestrife.
So that was Monica just showing a project that we actually partner with the Lake George Land Conservancy on to release those beetles throughout Warren County. to try to help with those populations, and that's very effective. I did want to mention, you know, there are lookalikes to this plant. One of them in particular that I think is pretty distinct is the winged loosestrife, but it'll have a different color flower on it, kind of like more of a blue and a lighter pink, and it'll be a much larger flower, but it does have that spike-like look. And then there's other species such as fireweed, blue vervain, or swamp loosestrife that you might mistaken this plant for. But overall, it's very showy. The invasive purple loosestrife itself, very easily identifiable with that square stem and those opposite entire leaves. So just for monitoring the species, again, continuous management, that's what makes the beetles so great, is that really you just want to make sure that there are enough plants there to support that population of beetles for large and to medium infestation sites. You know, if you do some hand digging or polling, you know, it's just going to be several years, and just really making sure that you're thorough and patient in your work to not break up those root fragments. You know, just a lot of time monitoring the area to make sure there's no new plants that might have emerged from a seed bank or an area where you turned up soil that was previously a loosestrife patch. And then, you know, just for disposing of this plant, you know, you're going to want to bag everything in a dark black contractor bag, and you're going to want to set it out in the sun to just make sure that, you know, it is not viable, and then just don't compost it, because, you know, it's just too much of a risk, and you would be disappointed if this ended up in another area of your property or neighboring property in your community. So alternative species we're going to find in these areas, cardinal flower that's actually blooming right now and is very beautiful, the winged loosestrife, which I mentioned earlier, and blue lobelia. So the last species I'm going to talk about is Japanese knotweed. This is originally from Eastern Asia, and it, you know, it pretty much just grows on disturbed sites here. So that's why, you know, we see it in riparian areas. The picture on the bottom, you know, you can see that that is a riverbank and how dense that patch is. So those areas, you know, they're experiencing ice scouring, changes in water level during heavy rainstorms or drought periods. And it just really makes it a great site for this species to establish, and is why, you know, it's such a concern. You know, so Japanese knotweed, just for identification of it, you know, it's a bushy perennial. You know, it has a bamboo-like appearance. I really don't think of any species that is a native lookalike to this plant, other than maybe something shrubby, because it has that bamboo-like appearance, and a lot of people call it Japanese bamboo or that bamboo plant, and it'll have a hollow stem to it. The leaves are also broadly ovate. When I show you a video later, Monica is going to point out the different types of leaf shapes that it has. And basically, you know, this species is, you know, you find it kind of anywhere on construction sites, road sites, stream banks, blooming in August to September. It has a lot of bees that really, you know, are always around it pollinating.
So I'm here in Warrensburg, found a great patch of knotweed. This has probably only been here for a few years. Probably came in if they were doing some like roadside fill or construction. Knotweed appears really often in disturbed areas. If it had been longer than a few years here, it would be probably up above my head. So once you've seen and identified knotweed, you're going to see it all over the place. It's called that bamboo plant a lot of the time because it does have kind of a very bamboo-ish stalk. It's got these leaves that are sometimes heart-shaped, but shaped sometimes kind of like a spade on a shovel. And then this like purplish reddish stem, and between July and August it gets these nice, very fragrant white flowers that the bees really, really like. But basically it just takes over an entire area. It becomes a monoculture, and the roots don't really stabilize stream banks, so it can lead to a lot of erosion. Controlling this mechanically is most likely not going to work. People have tried paving over it and it'll break through the pavement. Mowing it down might help with the aesthetics of your property, but realistically mowing it is just going to spread the knotweed more, because this reproduces asexually, so even a small fragment of the stem will just create an entire new plant. And from there it just establishes itself underground and has like a rhizomal spread, so it spreads through the roots and pops up all over the place. If you have knotweed on your property, most likely what you're going to want to do is meet with a certified, licensed pesticide applicator. What they will want to do is control it with a solution of glyphosate, and the Lake George Land Conservancy has in the past worked with landowners and worked with the town to help landowners in the town of Hague and the town of Bolton by working and contracting with an independent applicator. And what that applicator is probably going to do is follow the label instructions, use some protective equipment, maybe a mask, something like that, and put together sort of a gun. So they'll put a little bit of solution in here, screw this on. This is empty, of course, I'm not going to use it. And then, to be sure that they're getting directly into the plant and not having an impact on any other plants around it, or on the wildlife or anything like that, they're going to pull out an injector. It's kind of like a needle, and it has a hole right here at the tip. So what they'll do is kind of take that needle with the gun on it, of course. Let's see if I can. I'm not stabbing myself. Stick it in, and then pull the trigger to spray inside of the plant. This has pretty much a hollow stem, and it'll just bring the chemical throughout the plant, which is gonna, and down into the roots, which is gonna kill the plant and probably a lot of the plants around it, because they are all attached through their roots.
You know, start on kind of the management side of things and talk a little bit more about what Monica had mentioned with the bank stabilization. So, you know, this species, again, forming a dense monoculture, but, you know, you might think that it is, you know, great, my stream bank's really heavily vegetated, but it's not actually necessarily stabilizing any of the soil, because the roots are just so shallow. So when you have a really intense storm event, or, you know, these plants have died back for the winter and it's just standing stalks, you know, those streams are experiencing that ice scouring, or that, you know, spring thaw. It's just taking that bank away. And that's a huge issue for water quality and just, you know, the movement of sediment and erosion taking place. So a few of the management strategies, you know, you can try to mow it, but you need to mow it before it goes to flower, and probably several times throughout the year, and also just for probably at least 5 years or more. So just consider, you know, how much time and effort you want to take to try to control that species, because it is a slow process. And then in addition to that, you can also try to dig it up. I think that's challenging because anytime you break this plant, you know, any of those fragments can become a new plant. There's excavation. People have tried to bury it, which you can if you have the right amount of equipment. But again, you know, you just don't want to be breaking up that plant material. and you need to make sure it has the right depth. You might use thick black plastic to try to prevent that from germinating or any of that. There's also grazing. I haven't really known of that being very effective for anyone, but people have tried it in the past with goats and animals like that. You can tarp it. If you have a small enough patch, you can try it, but this species spreads by rhizome. So, you know, not just looking at the patch itself, you probably need to be setting a buffer that's at least 50 feet surrounding the patch to be looking for shoots that this plant will set out. So just making sure, you know, don't make it worse, but tarping can work, and make sure that tarp stays down and is nicely secured to the ground where sunlight cannot reach those plants. So this species, you know, we really emphasize at the district, you know, get clean fill. So we do not recommend composting this. So many times people dump it on properties of land conservancies and our town properties where it starts new patches, and we're really trying to prevent that because of the ecological impacts, shading out native plants, and also just the erosion that it causes. If you do some type of mowing, you know, you need to rake up all of that plant material, chopped up fragments, and you need to put them in a black plastic bag, and you need to set it out in the sun. And I usually try to do about 3 weeks. Some people do 2, but you just basically want to turn that material into mush so that it's not viable at all. There are, you know, since we're seeing this species on roadsides, which Monica's mentioned, in disturbed areas, you know, it's a very salt tolerant species. So what do we want to see there? Other salt tolerant species on that site once you have it eradicated. So a few of those species might be American cranberry, witch hazel, or silky dogwood. So, you know, I talked a lot about management when I spoke about my species, but, you know, it can be overwhelming for a site. So I just, you know, just to cover a few things about that, we need to stay realistic. So try to establish some management goals for your property. Do you have purple loosestrife? Do you have Japanese knotweed or some other type of species? And what do you want to see down the road? And what is realistic for that goal setting? Because this will take so many years to manage these species, but a lot of people have been very effective because they are diligent and persistent with managing. Also, you know, you want to focus on what is your priority area or species. If you have several invasives, you know, pick an easy one to start with. Pick a smaller patch, something where you can see the results so you just don't feel completely overwhelmed and give up, basically. You know, site management plan. So, you know, that is bringing up basically, you know, what is a realistic patch to start with, and what are some of these realistic expectations, and just writing that down so you have that and you're following that plan, or working with a licensed professional applicator to kind of set a plan for your property about number of treatments, or if you're doing different forms of management, if you're treating and then you're mowing. And just making sure that you really stick to that schedule so you can see results. Implementing those management actions, making sure you have the proper permits. You know, these are wet areas. So just, you know, you can implement those actions, but just make sure all your ducks are in a row. Record keeping, it's good to just know what you've done. So if 1 year it doesn't take, maybe that was because you put an herbicide treatment on it and it rained too soon, and so the treatment didn't take as well. And so you're making notes about that, or flowering times of those species, and just the patch size, you know, measuring, you know, all right, did my plant patch decrease by 30% or 10%? A little bit helps, to know every time. Also, just your time, it's gonna, be many years, but you will be very pleased once you have these plants removed for native populations. Resources, Lake George Land Conservancy is a great resource. If you want to know more about field identification of these, they offer a lot of day trips out onto their properties where they go and find these plants and map them and look for invasive pests such as hemlock woolly adelgid, or they're doing management. So you can learn how they're managing on their property and apply that to your own. We're also a resource. We can help you with that or come to your property and make recommendations. Disposal of these plants, what's the best way of disposing of species? I talked about that for all 3 of these species today. And just make sure whatever invasive you have on your property, you are disposing of it so that you're not affecting those neighboring lots or other community members. And then the last thing is just, monitoring and assessing. You need to revisit that site many times throughout the year and, put that in your record log just to say, yeah, there's no plants, or I pulled 2 plants. Because these plants can return. They have a seed bank. They have plant fragments left behind. You just never know. And you want to make sure that those efforts are, being positive for your property.
I'm Bob Bombard. I'm with the Warren County Soil and Water Conservation District. And today we'll be talking about the exotic invasive plants found in the Lake George, Lake Champlain watershed. Potamogetons are the most prevalent genera found in Lake George. Some of the native plants found throughout the watershed are P. pralongus, the white-stemmed pondweed, Gramineus, the variable leaf pondweed, Amphipholius, large leaf pondweed, and there are also several species of narrowleaf potamogetons found within the basin. The potamogeton we will be focusing on today will be P. crispus, curly-leaf pondweed. Introduced into the country in the late 1800s, it is now found throughout the continental United States, with the heaviest concentrations found in the upper Mississippi River Valley, the Great Lakes region, and the upper northeastern states. Key points about P. crispus are they are found in Warren County. Yearly growth starts under the ice. It dies back during mid to late summer, and most of the biomass is gone during the swimmable times of the year. Let's watch a short video about P. crispus. Curly-leaf pondweed reproduces by use of a turion, seen here, that was just removed from this plant. And in mid-June, these start forming. They will ebsize themselves. They'll fall right off, sink to the bottom, and will produce next year's plants. The curly leaf will disappear in mid-July. About the time people start swimming in Lake George, most of the curly leaf pondweed will be gone and start back up again in early April. They'll actually start growing under the ice, but is usually gone by midsummer. This photo is of P. crispus's reproductive structure called a turion. They form in late June and early July, fall from the dying plant, and take root during the late fall. Early in spring, while ice still covers the lakes, crispus begins growing months earlier than our native plants. This early start gives an advantage to curly leaf over our native vegetation. Removal of P. crispus before the production of the turion can greatly reduce the spread of this plant. Unlike the milfoils, fragments of this plant will not spread the species. Early removal is very important. Water milfoils. There are a number of native milfoils found in the Lake George, Lake Champlain Basin. Our talk today will be on the two most prevalent species, M. spicatum, the Eurasian water milfoil, the invasive, and M. sibiricum, northern water milfoil, the native. This picture is of the leaves found on both M. sibiricum and M. spicatum. Generally, 4 leaves surround the stem of each of these two milfoil plants. The shapes and the number of leaflet pairs and the shape of those pairs help us identify the species. Eurasian water milfoil reproduction occurs primarily by autofragmentation. Although they do produce viable seeds, after flowering, the main stem begins to branch. Each branch will form adventitious roots. The branches will then abscise themselves from the main stem, freely floating away by both wind and wave action. Slowly, they will sink and take root away from the mother plant. Fragments will remain viable for more than 1 year. Removal of the plant includes the entire root mass as early as possible before fragmentation occurs. This is your best option for removing the plant. If you cannot complete the removal before flowering, fragment control is very important. 2 other milfoils are found within the basin. Included in these are M. verticillatum, the world leaf milfoil, but it's very rare. The other, M. alterniflorum, is a small, only 1 to 2 foot tall plant, and it's very hard to mistake for Eurasian water milfoil. Trappa natans, water chestnut. Trappa is found primarily in the New England states, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Originally from Eurasia and Africa, it was brought here as an ornamental decorative plant for small fish ponds. It made its way into our local rivers during flooding events. Found throughout the lower Hudson and Mohawk River valleys, all along the canals and into the Lake Champlain, it has been removed from 2 lakes in Warren County, both Lake George and Loon Lake. It can take over shallow bays and wetlands when left unchecked. For those of you who've driven south on the Northway, the Oxbow Pond just north of the Twin Bridges in Albany are covered with trappa in the summertime. The seeds from water chestnut are almost 2 inches across with 4 short points that can pierce the bottom of your shoe. Each plant can produce upwards to 20 rosettes, with each rosette producing 20 seeds. I'll let you do the math. Before it's flowering, removal is necessary. It's very important. Oh yeah, each seed can stay viable for as long as a decade. Cases of mistaken identity. Plants mistaken for our invasive species. P. crispus is a very unique plant. The curly, lasagna-shaped leaves make it hard to mistake. The same is true for water chestnut, but a number of plants resemble Eurasian water milfoil. Let's look at a few. Ceratophyllum demersum locally known as coontail, is often mistaken for Eurasian water milfoil. But the coontail is a non-rooting, free-floating plant. It does not put down roots. M. beckii, Megalodonta beckii, is often mistaken for young milfoil. It's a rather short plant, no more than a foot and a half tall. Ranunculus longirosteris, the long-beaked buttercup, is easily identified because the leaves on the plant are alternate, not opposite, like milfoil. In Utricularia, which are also a free-floating plant and have no roots, also known as bladderworts, the plant is actually carnivorous, capturing zooplankton for its nutrients. Additional threats. Hydrilla, for those of you who overwinter in Florida, have no doubt heard of. The state of Florida spends huge amounts of money each year trying to control this plant in their freshwater lakes, rivers, and canals. Hydrilla has been found in southern New York in the lower Hudson Valley and in one of our Finger Lakes to our west. Egeria, known as Brazilian elodea, and hydrilla both resemble a local native plant, Elodea canadensis. In this slide, pictured are the three plants that most closely resemble Elodea canadensis, our native plant. You'll notice the nodes on Elodea have three leaves in each whorl. Egeria, the Brazilian elodea, will have 4 to 6 leaves per node. Hydrilla will have 5 leaves per whorl with a series of teeth along its mid-rib. Those are the key physical characteristics used to differentiate between these species. In this picture, the native plant, Elodea, can be somewhat mistaken for Egeria. You'll notice far more vegetation and closeness of nodes in the Egeria, and a greater separation between nodes in the Elodea. It's not unheard of to find nodes of Elodea canadensis with 3 or 4 whorls, but mostly it's 3. But the nodes may not be quite as separate as they are here. They can grow somewhat closer, as you see on the Egeria over here. So you have to be very careful when you're identifying these 3 plants. Those of us who work with aquatic invasive species are always checking out any Elodea we come across, looking for these invasive species. I think that's probably enough for today. I don't want to overload you with too much information. Thank you for watching. I'm Bob Bombard, Warren County Soil and Water.
So now that you know how to identify the biggest invasive threats to the region, it is important to talk about how to report infestations of those species. Earlier on with hemlock woolly adelgid, there were a few links and email addresses that were shared, and those are links specific to hemlock woolly adelgid. But another way to report HWA or any other invasive species is IMAP Invasives, which is New York's invasive species database, and a really great resource because it's used by citizen scientists and by professional land managers alike. So it's really like a one-stop shop that everyone plugs their data into. And it has a lot of cool features, but today I'm going to be focusing, just to get through it, the most important parts, which are the mobile application and the online database and how to report an infestation. But there are online tutorials that go super in depth about how to make the most of IMAP invasives, how to follow up on control efforts, how to see how controls are going, and then also just to kind of explore the page, sign yourself up for early detection alerts, and just follow around species distributions. So IMAP invasives has two components really. The mobile application, which you can get through the App Store on your cell phone. Most phones will allow for it. And what's really nice about this is that you don't need cellular data or Wi-Fi when you're out in the field and you find an invasive species. You don't need to be connected to a network to make a report. It's a great field application, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And basically, when the report is uploaded, it gets linked into a network that can be viewed from the whole entire online database, which can be done on mobile browser or on your laptop computer browser. So if you go through Safari or Internet Explorer or Google Chrome or Firefox, anything like that, you can see a full picture starting with a map of the continental US, but that can't be viewed on the app, which again is really just for simple day-to-day uploads. So the first step in getting involved in IMAP invasives is to create an account. You'll plug in an email and a password, of course. This can only be done through the browser. You cannot create an app, or excuse me, you cannot create an account through the mobile app. So you need to go to www.imapinvasives.org and create an email password combination. Excuse me, that's to log in. You'll need to enter first, last name, email, password combination, and select your jurisdiction, which if you're watching this in New York State, it's most likely going to be New York State. When you join, you'll get an email notification. It might be in your spam box, but you'll need to follow the link in that email just to get fully officially signed up. Once you're signed up, you can enter the mobile application on your phone, and you'll be able to log in and get yourself started. So when you open the IMAP Invasives mobile application, it will most likely prompt you to log in, but if it doesn't, you'll go over to the upper left-hand corner and go to Preferences. So the first thing that you'll see is it will ask you for your jurisdiction. Again, if you're watching this, you're probably a New York State resident, full or part-time, and you will be entering New York State as your jurisdiction. And then you'll log in with your IMAP Invasives user ID, which is going to be the email you used earlier on the IMAP Invasives website, and your password. If you're anything like me and forget your password all the time, there is an option to reset your password, and it'll open up the web browser and send you another email. And if you click on this button, again, all of this is under Preferences in the left menu. You can select Retrieve IMAP Lists, and basically what that does is links in your app to the online browser full database, and so it'll pull in invasive species names, project names for the state of New York, your jurisdiction. After that, you're still in the Preferences menu. It will ask you how you'd like the species to be listed. I tend to choose scientific and common. Some people go just on common, which would have things like honeysuckle or pondweed, but some people do prefer the scientific names. I think as a general rule of thumb, it's smart to just choose both, and you can kind of go how you like to do it. You can select the customized species list, and basically what that will do is if you're out in the woods and there are 10 species of interest for you, that you are always looking for, and those are the bane of your existence, like Japanese knotweed is for me, you can select that species and it will shorten the amount of time you have to look through species lists later on every time you make a record. So it just shortens things and makes everything a little bit quicker and easier in the future. It'll ask you to select picture quality. General rule of thumb is to go with 100%. It just makes it easier for other users on the online database to see what species it is that you are reporting. It will also give you a chance to select whether or not you'd like to save photos to your phone library. Pretty much, it doesn't make a difference if you do it or not. And you can choose which map you'd like to select, road or satellite. So basically aerial imagery or a map of roads around you for when you do make a report. I just go with road because it loads faster on my phone, but satellite might help it to be a little more specific for the location that you are making an infestation report. It also gives you the opportunity to select a default project. The Lake George Land Conservancy has a project that's called LGLC Forest Invasives. So that is my default project, and my default organization is the Lake George Land Conservancy. And basically, when I upload to it, we get a notification. I don't think this step is necessary. Some people like to do it, especially if you are part of a volunteer crew and you're answering back to somebody. I know APIP offers project names, but it's not completely necessary. So this is really, I think, the most important stuff after you've gotten the preferences out of the way. If you're out in the woods and you see an invasive species, you can go into IMAP Invasive's mobile app and click on the Add Observation button. So really important for invasives is to include photo evidence. You can take a picture at the moment with your camera, or you can take a bunch of pictures and then pick your favorite and select a photo out of your library. And then through either the custom list or the full species list, select the species. So if you see honeysuckle, you can hit the honeysuckle button. And if you see a species, for example, honeysuckle, you'll click the species detected button. But if you're out in the woods looking for hemlock woolly adelgid and you don't find hemlock woolly adelgid, but you looked for it and you just want to make a note that it's not found where you were just hiking, it's still valuable to know where people are hiking and looking but not finding anything. So you can select the species not detected button. And then of course you'll get the date. It'll probably automatically arrange the date for itself. And it'll give your location too. So I hike in the woods on airplane mode a lot. I turn the cell data off of my phone just to preserve battery life. But that doesn't really make a difference because somehow, magically, the power of technology, it remembers your location, and you can zoom in and kind of adjust with your finger along the screen exactly where your location is. You can zoom in really close. You can zoom far away to get an estimate, but it will remember your approximate longitude and latitude. So again, you also have the option of selecting a project. For me, it would be LGLC Forest Invasives, and my organization would be LGLC. But again, I don't know if this is completely necessary. It's just something that makes tracking invasives and tracking my workload a little bit easier in my office. And you can add observations. So say you have identified and you report one species or one individual plant, but there's a whole row of them, and there's about a half acre. You can make that note, and it will be available on the online browser later on. And then, of course, hit save. But that will not automatically upload the report. Especially if you're out and on airplane mode, you have to wait until you're back in the office or wherever you have cell data or Wi-Fi, and you can reopen the app, and in yellow, the report that you have made will appear, and if it's in yellow, that means it hasn't been uploaded yet. So you can select this little button here, little box, and then again go to the upper left-hand corner and hit Upload Selected. And it'll ask if you're sure that you're ready to upload that record, and you can select yes, okay, go. And now that record is available through the online browser, and it can be viewed by you or by anybody else. So people who have the same interest in a particular invasive species that you do will be able to track the spread of this invasive species. And one thing that the online browser is really good for now, a change that they made within the last few years when they updated the website that I think is really neat, is that not only can you now see where an infestation occurred. So hemlock woolly adelgid was reported in 2017 on Prospect Mountain in the town of Lake George. And that was all, you know, it was managed, and it was good to know that it was managed. But it's nice now to see that that management, that treatment appears on the IMAP Invasives website. So you can go over when you're on your laptop or even on the mobile browser option for this website, but it's definitely easiest on the laptop. You can go over to the layers and select treatments, and it will show the treatment records for an area. So I'm able to see that that hemlock woolly adelgid infestation was treated, and I can even go in and see the details of it and see that it was treated in October of 2017 by Zach from APIP, Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program. And it's just kind of a really nice way to tie in all of these data points on IMAP invasives. There are a lot of data points, literally thousands and thousands of uploads over the years, and it's a nice way to kind of close down the record, and it's a good way for people to see that the work that they do and that the work that they've contributed is actually being resolved. So again, this was a pretty quick crash course on IMAP invasives, and I didn't do that to minimize how important I think it is. I just recognize I've been talking for a long time. But there is more information on imapinvasives.org, and there is an entire YouTube channel with more detailed tutorials about some of the more advanced features that IMAP Invasives has, and I would recommend that you check that out. But I would also recommend, even if you don't want to get too advanced with IMAP Invasives, it's something that's worth having on your phone. That way, if you're out in the woods and you see a new invasive species or something that you don't even really know what it is, you can make a note of it, because that one infestation might pop up to be a bigger problem down the road. And this is just a nice way to keep all of the information together and to make sure that somebody is monitoring it, and then eventually that our invasives get treated.
Okay, so the other portion of this grant beyond doing the trainings is that Nui Pick and the Lake Champlain Basin program gave us funding to put together some scouting and restoration toolkits, and these will be helpful for just identification and doing some home management on your property for just some smaller patches, and you can find a lot of useful tools in these. So what's included in the bucket? Obviously, you got a 5-gallon bucket with a lid. That's really helpful for you know, putting seed heads in or cuttings, and then the lid just kind of keeps everything inside and seals that shut. in case like you're traveling with the plants and you don't have a bag. It's just a good backup. There's also a ruler, which is very helpful for identification purposes. When you look in the field guide, which you will have a field guide included in this called the Invasive Species Field Guide from the Finger Lakes Prism and Wayne County Soil and Water. And usually, in these guides, they'll go into specifics about leaf lengths, and looking at that. And this ruler is just a little bit better than the ones that are provided in the books, and just easier to use. You'll also have some flagging, so you can mark out boundaries of patches or buffer zones, or you can throw a piece of flagging on a questionable plant, email us a picture, or have us come out. But just so that you kind of know where the plant is, if it's just a spot that has a lot of other plants in there, you can easily find it again. The magnifier loop, that's used for just seeing those fine details of the plants, and that'll help with your identification stuff. Bypass pruners, those can be used for cutting seed heads, portions of the plant back, taking a sample of the plant and bringing it to a facility like Lake George Land Conservancy or Cornell Cooperative Extension or us, and we can help you identify it. There's aquarium nets that goes into the aquatic side of things. There's a pruning saw. I find these very helpful because most of the sites we go into are very heavily infested with other invasive species that we haven't even mentioned today. Some of those might be Oriental bittersweet or multifloral rose, but usually when you find one invasive plant, you're probably finding a few more, and so that can help with accessibility. You have a trowel, so digging up small plants that are shallow rooted, like garlic mustard or something along those lines that are herbaceous. You have contractor bags. You're always going to want to replenish these, and we can provide you some too if you use up the ones in the bucket. But the contractor bags are great because it's a heavy-duty plastic bag that won't be as prone to breaking if you have woody herbaceous material in the bag. And those can just be set out in the sun, and they usually are not prone to busting open or any of that. Also, you'll have the Rain in the Rain notebook, which is not pictured in this photo, but the Rain in the Rain notebooks are great for just writing down, keeping track of what you did that day or what you saw, or notes or questions you might have. And that's just some waterproof paper that you can just keep in there. And you could even put like key facts that kind of help you identify a certain invasive species, and that just kind of be your go-to notebook for that information. And then lastly, which I mentioned above earlier, was the Invasive Species Field Guide. This should have all the invasives we discussed in the training, and these are great guides, very useful. And we hope you enjoy them. So to go along with the Scouting and Restoration toolkits, some of the registrants have received the toolkits or will receive them because we have so many that go out within the public. But we also are providing a tool loan program. And so if you weren't able to get a bucket, you're able to take one on loan from facilities like Lake George Land Conservancy, which is our partner for these trainings, Up Yonda Farm, our office, Warren County Soil and Water, and the Lake George Association. And these are all in various areas within the Lake George watershed within Warren County, so that should be pretty helpful for people being able to get them. But there are buckets still available to you, and even people who could not participate in this training, they can be trained on how to use some of the tools in that. and we'll also be able to ask for them on loan. In addition to that, we have restoration tools that are available beyond what's in the bucket, and those are uprooters, which I've pictured here on the right. They're basically a weed wench, so it can go around like a woody shrub like honeysuckle, or I've used it on like big patches of black locust for little seedlings, and those are great for just pulling out those woody seedlings and shrubs that are just challenging to pull out on your own. They're just a little too strong to do a hand pull with. There's also going to be hoary soil knives, so those are great for sites that just are rocky and gravelly, and those can be really helpful for just popping out plants. There's a mattock that'll be available, loppers, sieves, and those are for looking for different aquatics with the sieves. If you're more interested in the lake side of things, and what's happening in the water. There's spearhead spades. Those are also great for rocky, gravelly sites for plants that are hard to get to. And then the last thing is the thatch rakes, which are great for using rake tosses and just, slowly pulling up the invasive plants out of your pond, or even if you cut back like Phragmites, you can use these as rakes to like rake up the pile of stuff, and they're pretty good for that. And you can identify plants that attach to them, or any of that stuff. Raking up the biomass. So, Monica went into the IMAP invasives portion of this grant. And we use that quite extensively in both of our offices, as it's a really good tool for record keeping and just understanding how invasive species travel. But we're also going to give people the option that if you don't want to make an IMAP invasives account and do things on the computer for what your management or your identification of patches is, but instead you can fill out this short survey where you can tell us what you found, the location of it, when you found it, and then information about the infestation. And not pictured here, but on the back side there's questions about whether or not you did perform management, or if you have suggested management for the area. And we will enter that in on IMAP invasives for you. So you can just schedule a time to either email it to us or come to the office, and we can show you how to do that. Okay, so we're going to segue into the discussion portion of this. And so if people have questions or want to talk about their experience, or maybe schedule a time for us to come out and help you a bit with your property and what you can do, we'll go into that.